Episode 1. The Stain That Wouldn't Dry. They told her it was just a chapel. Old, empty, forgotten. Nothing but dust, wood, and the echo of hymns no one remembered how to sing. But the moment Mara stepped into St. Oriel's chapel, something in her blood woke up. She didn't feel fear at first. She felt watched, like the silence inside the walls wasn't empty, but listening, remembering. And whatever it remembered her. The wooden door creaked shut behind her, as if pushed by invisible hands. Dust swirled in the air like ghosts still rehearsing old processions. The pews were crooked. The stained glass windows shattered in strange patterns, as if something inside had wanted out. She walked slowly toward the altar. 1 step, 2, then pain. Sharp, low, sudden. A coil deep in her belly twisted, like an ancient muscle remembering a contract. She gasped and doubled over, pressing her hand between her thighs. Wet, her fingers came back red. Mara hadn't bled in almost a year. Her body had stopped working after the overdose. The doctor said trauma did that she was lucky to be alive. But this wasn't her cycle. This was something else. Because when she looked up, the blood was dripping onto the altar. She hadn't moved. She hadn't touched it. But there it was, a fresh smear across a stone slab where no one had worshipped in decades. And it wasn't random. It looked like an eye. Open, wide, watching. Her breath caught in her throat. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, looked again. Still there. And then the whisper. At first she thought it was the wind, but the sound didn't come from the windows. It came from the statue of the Virgin, looming in the back. White, cracked, hollow-eyed. It said, "You are not praying. You are awakening me." Mara staggered backward. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She looked around. Empty. No one. But the Virgin's head had turned. Just slightly. Just enough. That night, back in her assigned room at the halfway house. She couldn't sleep. She checked her phone. No signal. Checked the beds. The other girls were snoring. One was whispering Latin in her sleep. Mara's fingers trembled as she unwrapped the cloth bundle she'd hidden under her hoodie. Inside was the rag she used to clean the blood from the altar. She hadn't meant to keep it. She just couldn't throw it away. She unfolded it now. It was dry, except for one spot, right in the center. Still wet, still red, and shaped exactly like the one on the altar. The next morning, the chapel smelled different. Not like rot, not like age. Like something new had bloomed overnight. Something that had never belonged to this world. She walked in slowly. This time, she carried gloves, a rag, bleach. But as she approached the altar, her knees buckled because the eye was back, bigger, deeper. And this time, it blinked. Mara screamed. No one came. Outside, birds stopped singing. Inside, the Virgin smiled. And the altar whispered again in a voice only her womb could understand. He is not dead. He is only waiting. And you, daughter of ash and ruin, have just cracked open the door. Episode 2, The Virgin That Blinked. It began with a statue's smile. Not a wide smile. Not cartoonish or dramatic. Just a curl, a twitch at the corner of her marble lips. So subtle Mara thought she'd imagined it. But when she blinked, the smile was gone. She hadn't touched the statue. No one had. The chapel was still officially condemned. The restoration program just a front to occupy wayward girls like her. But something had changed overnight. The scent in the air was no longer dust. It was sweeter now, like incense burning underground mixed with something metallic, like rust or blood. Mara stood motionless in front of the Virgin, eyes locked with hers. The statue stared back. Glass eyes, painted pupils, blank expression. But the longer she stared, the more Mara felt pierced. Like she wasn't just being watched, but measured, remembered, cataloged. You saw it too, a voice whispered behind her. Mara jumped, heart racing. It was Inez, the girl with the soft eyes and a tattoo of a serpent coiled around a crucifix on her wrist. She'd been silent the past few days, almost like a ghost herself. You watched her move, Inez said again. Didn't you? Mara didn't answer. She didn't have to. She only does that, Inez continued, when she likes your blood. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She dreamt of the Virgin, but not carved in marble. She saw her walking barefoot across the chapel, her white robe soaked in blood that wasn't hers. Her eyes were hollow sockets filled with light, and when she knelt at the altar, the eye of blood opened wide and wept. In the dream, the Virgin reached out and touched Mara's belly. The womb remembers what the mind denies. Mara woke up screaming. The sheets were stained, but it wasn't sweat. It wasn't even blood. It was oil, thick, fragrant, smelling like old chrism and something deeper, like rot soaked in roses. The next morning, she returned to the chapel. She had to see it again, had to know she wasn't insane. She brought her phone this time, hidden, ready to record. She sat in the last pew, angled toward the statue, then walked away. No one saw her slip out. No one followed. That night, under the covers, she played the footage. At first, nothing. 30 minutes of silence. Static. Dust drifting. Then, at 2:44 a.m., the statue blinked. Once. Slowly. And as it blinked, the lights in the chapel, though unplugged, flashed. Candles flickered. And a voice, low, ancient, feminine, whispered in Latin. Mater vera non ficta, sanguis orit, caro audit. True mother, not fabricated. Blood prays. Flesh listens. Mara dropped the phone. She stared at her reflection in the window, but something was wrong. Her reflection was still blinking. Even though she wasn't, her body froze. The air around her thickened, and then the voice came again, this time from inside her room. Not in Latin, not in dreams. Just two words. Soft, final, meant for her alone. Welcome back. The Virgin was no longer watching. She was remembering. And Mara had just become the trigger. Episode 3. The girls who were never buried. There were names beneath the altar, not etched in gold, not carved by clergy. They were scratched into the wood, deep and angry, as if each letter had been clawed by someone desperate to not be erased. Lucia, Amara, Therese, Noemi, Selah. 5 names. All girls. All forgotten. All dead, but there were no records. No obituaries. No tombstones in the parish cemetery. Only names, buried beneath holy ground, where no one but Mara had dared to kneel. And she didn't find them with her eyes. She found them with her blood. It started when she tried to clean the altar again. The eye-shaped stain had spread. Not wider, deeper, like it was soaking into the stone, like the stone was drinking. She brought gloves, bleach, salt, anything to prove she still had some kind of control. But as soon as her hand touched the surface, her body froze. Her palm burned. And then, visions, not dreams, not hallucinations, memories that weren't hers. She saw a girl with long black hair being held down by 2 nuns. Her mouth was sewn shut with rosary beads. She was screaming through her eyes. Another girl, ginger curls, barely 16, locked inside a confessional, belly swollen, whispering, "It's not a child, it's a calling." Then a third, lying limp on the chapel floor, arms outstretched like a crucifix, her hands freshly branded with inverted crosses. Mara jerked away, gasping, and on her palm, now burned red, were 5 letters, Lucia. She went to Sister Agnes that night, the only nun still living on the premises. Old, half-blind, voice like parchment folding. "Do you know these names?" Mara asked, shoving a torn piece of paper at her. Agnes didn't look. She didn't need to. "I prayed for them," she whispered, "when no one else dared, when Rome told us to forget." "What happened to them?" Agnes stared at Mara for a long time, then said, almost gently, "You were never supposed to remember." Back in her room, Mara couldn't sleep. The air was too heavy, the shadows too loud. She lit a candle, sat on the floor, pressed her fingers to her belly, and whispered the names one by one. Lucia, Amara, Therese, Noemi, Selah. The flame flickered violently. And then her phone lit up. She hadn't touched it. A notification. Unknown file received. She opened it. A photo of her kneeling at the altar, taken from behind. But she'd been alone that day. Hadn't she? She zoomed in. In the shadow near her back, just barely visible, was a hand resting on her shoulder. Translucent, female, fingernails broken, skin torn, and below it, in faint letters across the bottom of the photo, "You are our last body." Outside, the chapel bell rang. It hadn't moved in decades. Mara opened her window and stared into the night. The bell tolled once, twice, 5 times, then silence, then a whisper not from the wind, but from the ground below. "We were never buried, so now we rise through you." Episode 4, The Gospel According to Blood. Some books are written in ink, some in fire, but the one Mara found beneath the chapel floor was written in blood, and it wasn't bound in leather. It was bound in skin. It began with a knock that wasn't a knock, a hollow sound from under the altar, like bones tapping wood from beneath. For 2 nights, she ignored it, prayed it was her imagination, blamed the pipes, the wind, the creaks of an old building. But on the 3rd night, her sleep broke with a whisper, "Read us." She returned to the chapel before sunrise. Candles flickered on before she touched them. And when she placed her hand over the altar's surface, a soft click echoed, and the panel slid open. Inside was a book wrapped in red cloth, aged so badly it felt like dried petals. The cloth peeled away like shedding skin. What lay beneath was not a book, not really. It pulsed when she touched it, and when her blood from the altar, still staining her fingertips, dropped onto the cover, a verse appeared, letter by letter, in Latin, but not any Latin the church would recognize. She carried it to her room, heart pounding, tucked herself beneath her blanket, like a child hiding from thunder. She opened the first page, blank, until she bled. Not much, just a scrape on her palm from an old nail on the chapel door. But as soon as her blood touched the paper, words bloomed. They didn't appear in straight lines. They spiraled. A sentence curled inward like a snake, ending in a symbol she didn't recognize. She read aloud, voice shaking, "Carn que meminit, verbum revivicit." In the flesh that remembers, the word revives. And then the walls began to breathe, not metaphorically, not symbolically. The plaster expanded and collapsed, as if the room itself had lungs. And from the book center, a second verse appeared, written in red so dark it was almost black. "This is not a gospel of salvation. This is the gospel of reclamation. We are the verses buried beneath your hymns." That night, Mara couldn't stop bleeding. It wasn't violent. It wasn't painful. It was ritual. Every few hours, a new line appeared, on her thighs, on her ribs, across her stomach, like a holy tattoo searing through her skin. She covered herself with a towel, stared into the mirror, and tried to read what her body was becoming. The verses made no sense, until she reached the last one, etched low across her pelvis. The mother of the final psalm must be flesh unremembered. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew what it asked of her, to forget who she had been and become scripture. The next morning, the chapel was different. The Virgin statue was gone. In its place stood a mirror, and carved into wood beneath it, the word became blood, and now the blood remembers its name. Mara touched the mirror. Her reflection smiled, but she didn't, and the gospel beneath her skin whispered in 100 women's voices, "Amen, girl of the altar. You are the 6th verse." Episode 5, The Conception Without Touch. Mara hadn't been touched in months. Not a kiss, not a hand, not even a whisper close enough to stir the hairs on her skin. And yet, she was pregnant. The doctor at the county clinic stared at the ultrasound like it had just insulted him. "That's impossible," he muttered for the 5th time. Mara didn't answer. She was too focused on the black and white screen. There was something there, not shaped like a fetus, not quite human, more like a halo inside the womb, pulsating gently, radiating in waves. The machine glitched every time it tried to measure a heartbeat. "There's no cardiac activity," he said, shaking his head. "But it's not dead. Look." He turned the volume up, and instead of a heartbeat, music, distant, ethereal, like a choir singing from under the earth. The doctor turned pale. I'm going to refer you to a specialist." But Mara already knew. No one could explain this, because this wasn't conception. It was implantation. Back in the chapel, the mirror had changed again. Now, when Mara stood before it, her reflection didn't match her movements. It looked at her with a softness she didn't recognize, like it knew what was growing inside her, like it had carried it once, too. She pressed her hand to her belly. It was still flat, but it didn't feel empty. It felt listening, and when she whispered, "What are you?" it whispered back, not in sound, in memory. Suddenly she saw women, dozens of them, kneeling on cold floors, eyes rolled back, hands trembling, each one bleeding at the altar, each one receiving something without ever being touched. The scenes flickered through her like strobe lights of the past. One collapsed, one chanted, one walked into fire with a smile, and then one looked straight at her. Lucia, one of the forgotten girls. She opened her mouth, and instead of a name came a prophecy. The seventh womb never needed seed. It only needed remembrance. The next day, a priest arrived at the facility, sent by the archdiocese. Young, handsome, calm. His name was Father Silas. He met Mara in the chapel, asked her questions like they were playing chess. When was your last known cycle? Have you ever been touched inappropriately? Do you believe what's happening to you is divine? She answered with silence. He stared at her belly, then closed his eyes in prayer. And when he opened them, they weren't the eyes of a man of God. They were the eyes of someone who had seen this before. "You need to terminate," he said. Mara tilted her head. "No one touched me." "I know," he replied. "That's why it's worse." That night, she vomited oil. Thick, gold tinged, smelling of ashes and lilies. She collapsed beside the altar, breathless, crying, and the book opened by itself. New words burned across the page in red fire. Heaven has already lost this child once. It will not lose him again. The air turned electric. The candles blew out one by one, and in the silence, her womb pulsed, not with life, but with memory, and the memory was not hers. In her dream, she stood at the edge of an ocean made of stars. A woman in a veil approached her. Her face was hollow. Her voice was thunder. "You have not been chosen to carry life. You have been chosen to carry proof." Mara tried to scream, but her voice had already been given to the child inside her. Episode 6, the Mass for one. No one announced the Mass. There were no bells, no choir, no priest. Just a slip of paper slid under Mara's door before dawn. White, blank, except for a single line. "Come hungry." The chapel was darker than usual. The stained glass no longer filtered light. It reflected none. The colors had turned to ash, and the air carried the scent of myrrh drowned in salt. But the candles were lit, dozens of them, all around the pews, all flickering in perfect rhythm. Like the chapel was breathing through flame. She stepped inside. The door shut behind her, and every candle stilled, not a flicker, not a tremble, as if flame itself were holding its breath. Mara walked the aisle barefoot, drawn by something more instinct than intent. At the front, the altar was no longer bare. Upon it, a chalice, a plate, and a single white wafer, round, thin, and trembling, as if it knew it was being watched. The moment she stepped before it, the organ in the corner, long dead, played a single note, low, wounded, like a groan that had waited a century to be heard. Then silence again, and that's when she saw it. The pews were no longer empty, not with bodies, with impressions, indentations on the wooden benches, as if someone or something was sitting, breathing, bowing their heads. Mara felt their presence without seeing their faces. 5 pews back, she smelled lavender. 3 pews left, the air turned icy. And behind her, directly behind her, someone exhaled, her knees bent without her consent. She knelt before the altar, eyes wide, fingers trembling. She reached for the wafer. It stuck to her skin like silk, warm, pulsing. And as it touched her tongue, she remembered not her own memories, theirs, the girls who came before. She saw Lucia walking barefoot into the chapel during a thunderstorm, whispering a hymn in reverse. She saw Noemi hiding the chalice under her bed, bleeding from the ears. She saw Therese give birth on the altar, not to a child, to a voice, and then silence, because now it was her turn. The wafer melted. The chalice rose, on its own, hovering in the air before her. It tilted, and something thick, dark, and hot poured from it. Not wine, not blood, something between both. It spilled down her throat. It burned. It sang. And then she heard the liturgy, not spoken aloud, not sung, but vibrating through her bones. In the name of she who bled first, in the name of the altar that does not forget, we commune through Mara, the living tabernacle. She opened her eyes. The candlelight turned red. The walls began to weep. Oil dripping down the stone like tears that had been stored for centuries. She looked behind her, and for a moment, just a moment, every seat was filled. Women, veiled, silent, watching. Some were smiling, some crying. Some had no faces at all. They raised their hands in unison, and the voice inside her womb whispered, "This is the first of 9 masses. And you, child of the 6th verse, are now the priestess of our forgetting." Mara collapsed. The chapel darkened. And in that pitch-black silence, the only sound was the click of the chalice returning to the altar. On its own. Episode 7. The prayer that screamed back. She only wanted to say a simple prayer. Just one. Just something that felt normal, familiar, something that didn't bleed or burn or sing in tongues. So she knelt in the empty chapel, in front of the altar that once dripped oil, once echoed with invisible choirs, once held a chalice that moved on its own. She folded her hands, closed her eyes, opened her mouth. "Our Father, who art in heaven." And then the walls shook, not gently, not symbolically. They shook, as if the very bones of the building rejected the prayer. She tried again. "Hallowed be thy..." The air split. A low-frequency screech filled the room, like metal being pulled across teeth. Her ears rang. Her nose bled. The candles turned black. She gasped and fell back. And behind her, something repeated her words, but wrong. Not an echo. Not a demon. The altar. It spoke, mocking, reversing. "Nevea nitrile, red FRUO." Backwards. Backwards. Like her voice had been pulled through death and returned disfigured. She tried again, whispering this time, "Hail Mary." The sound cut off in her throat, not like choking, like confiscation, as if the name Mary could no longer be uttered in this place without consequence. Her lips moved, but the sound didn't come from her. Instead, a cry, high, piercing, infant-like. From the altar, she stared in horror. The surface began to pulse. The cracks between the marble slabs widened, and from inside came a rhythm, not a heartbeat but a breath. Long, slow, sleeping, not dead, not divine, dormant. Mara backed away, whispering to herself in panic. But her whispers weren't hers anymore. Each word was a trigger, each syllable a knock, and behind every knock, something stirred. On the walls, the names of the 5 forgotten girls reappeared, not scratched this time, but engraved in light. Lucia, Amara, Therese, Noemi, Selah, and below them one more. Mara. She hadn't carved it. No one had. But there it was, still glowing, still wet, as if it had just been written from inside her. She ran, out the chapel, down the hallway, into her room. She slammed the door and screamed into the silence. And the silence screamed back. Not loud, not brutal, but clear. Stop praying to what left you. That night, she dreamt of a rosary made of teeth. Each bead a girl's name, each prayer a burial. And when she reached the final bead, the string broke and a voice hissed. The prayers you learned were meant to contain us. But you, Mara, you are the breach. She woke up choking on ashes. Black, bitter, smelling of incense burned too long. The mirror across her room fogged with her breath. And in the condensation, 5 words appeared, slowly, from the inside of the glass. Heaven no longer takes calls. Episode 8, The Forgotten Archangel. It was hidden behind confessional. Not in it, behind it. Mara had only found the hollow after she pushed her back against the wood and felt it give, just slightly, like a breath held too long. The panel creaked open with a sound like something exhaling after centuries. Inside, wrapped in cloth the color of dried bone, was a scroll. Not paper, vellum, skin, and branded into its surface, not ink, but burn. A sigil, a spiral broken by a feather. And underneath, a name, a Samuel. She had never heard it before, and yet it tasted familiar on her tongue. As a meal, it sounded almost holy. Almost. She unwrapped the scroll. The language twisted. The letters crawled. Not Latin, not Hebrew, something older, living in the lungs of ancient tongues long buried beneath church stone. But as her fingers traced the lines, she understood. Not with her mind, with her body. Her blood warmed. Her spine shivered. Her skin tingled like it had just remembered a story it once lived. And the scroll began to speak. Not aloud, in her marrow. I was the keeper of the wombs, the voice whispered. The one who carried the flame before it was called divine. Mara blinked. Images filled her mind like water flooding a cracked wall. She saw an angel, not with wings of white, but smoke and ash, walking between women in the desert. Each woman bore a brand beneath her rib, and when the angel touched them, they sang, not with voices, but with light that poured from their mouths like rivers of stars. A Samuel, not fallen, erased, removed from the book, because he gave the fire to women, because he said they were temples, not vessels, because he taught them how to hold the word without being broken, and that was unforgivable. The scroll trembled in her hands. The words shifted. A second passage revealed itself. When heaven grew afraid of the voices that bled, they turned on me, they turned on us, and wrote silence into your hymns. Mara clutched her stomach. The child inside her kicked, once, then twice. But it wasn't a kick. It was a signal. And in her ears, the voice of a Samuel echoed. You carry not a child, but the memory of what they burned. Your womb is a reliquary, and I have returned to reclaim it. She stumbled back, breath sharp, throat dry. In the mirror beside the altar, her reflection shifted. Her eyes were no longer just hers. Behind them, a flicker of smoke, a spiral of light, a feather cracked but still falling. She spoke, not in English, not in any tongue she knew. The scroll burned in her hands. And still she spoke, her voice rising like a choir with 100 mouths. I name what heaven has hidden. I speak what the church has buried. I awaken a Samuel. At that moment, the bell of the chapel rang 13 times. No one pulled it. No wind moved it. No rope existed. And yet it rang. And beneath it, the air whispered like a child remembering a lullaby. The archangel has no altar left, but now he has a mouth. Episode 9, The Womb That Spoke Prophecies. Mara no longer dreamed like she used to. There were no symbols, no shifting faces, no cryptic visions buried beneath layers of metaphor. Now, she dreamed in words, exact, clear, unforgiving. And when she woke, the words were written on the walls, not scribbled in marker, not hallucinated, etched in blood. Her own. The first time it happened, she thought it was a breakdown. She woke in the chapel, slumped against a pew, her hand stained red, the wall beside her read, the first will not return, but the sixth will open what the skies sealed. She stared at it for hours. Her body ached like she'd been sleepwalking in a storm. Her throat was sore. Her tongue tasted like salt and rust. And deep in her belly, a voice pulsed, not speaking, humming, a rhythm just beneath her heartbeat, like something forming syllables inside her blood. She tried to film it, left a recorder beside her bed, hit play, slept. When she woke, she found her sheets soaked, the walls covered, and the recorder shattered. But the last words it caught before breaking still played on loop. The mother has remembered. The language is waking. Prepare the breath. She didn't remember saying it, but it was her voice. And it wasn't. One night, she blacked out completely. No dreams. Just black. She woke on the chapel floor. Mouth dry. Nose bleeding. The mirror across on the altar was covered in fingerprints. Hers. And written backwards across the glass. Write what heaven erased. She turned to the altar. The gospel was open again, but the words had changed. New verses, bleeding to the pages like veins. And at the center, drawn in a circle of her own blood, the child has no heart. He breathes through scripture. He does not grow. He reactivates. The next morning, her stomach twitched. Not a kick, not pain, movement, but the shape beneath her skin wasn't right. Not round, not fetal, more like a spiral, spinning, tightening like a cyclone of thought. And when she spoke that day at breakfast to Sister Agnes, it wasn't her. Her voice dropped an octave, her eyes glazed, and the words that came out silenced the room. In the hour of the sixth flame, she will bleed backwards, and the sky will remember its first betrayal. Everyone froze. Even the crucifix on the wall seemed to tilt. Mara blinked. Did I just... She began. Agnes only nodded. He's using your mouth now. Later that night, Mara locked herself in the chapel. She tried to pray again. This time, not to God, not even to a Samuel, just to whatever was inside her. What are you? She whispered. Her stomach rippled. And then, her voice again but layered doubled like a choir of echoes stacked inside her throat. I am not your child. I am your proof. I am not what comes next. I am what was buried. Then silence. Then the final prophecy of the night. Written across the ceiling in blood, she didn't remember shedding. The prophecy was never about what would happen. It was about what already did, and who refused to see it. Mara curled beneath the altar, clutching her belly. The floor breathed with her. The candles flickered like heartbeats, and the gospel whispered to itself in 100 forgotten tongues. And inside her, something that was not quite human smiled. Episode 10, The Baptism in Ashes. The day began with smoke, not from a fire, not from incense, but from books, dozens of them, holy books, Bibles, missals, prayer books, all piled in the chapel courtyard, still warm from a flame Mara hadn't seen, but whose scent clung to her skin like regret. Sister Agnes met her at the threshold. No words, just a nod, and a bowl, ceramic, cracked, heavy. Inside, ashes, not gray, not white, but black, black like something that had once resisted being burned. Mara stared into the bowl. It wasn't just dust. It moved, like soot possessed by memory, like the charred bones of forgotten gospels were still exhaling something holy. Is this for communion? She asked, already knowing the answer. Agnes shook her head. It's for initiation, she whispered. It's time. Time for what? Agnes turned toward the chapel, for the word to enter you fully. The altar had changed again, gone with a chalice and wafer. Now there was only a basin carved into the stone. Shallow, wide, waiting. Agnes led Mara forward, her steps silent on the stone floor. Each pew she passed was empty, but filled. Invisible eyes tracked her movement. The pressure of presence pressed down like 1,000 breaths held at once. She stood before the basin. Agnes poured the ashes into it, and as they touched the carved bowl, they hissed. Not from heat, from resistance, like they didn't want to return to their source. Why ashes? Mara asked. Agnes looked at her, old eyes sharp. Because what's inside you cannot be baptized in water. It already remembers the flood. It was never meant to be cleansed, only reactivated. Mara's hands trembled. She looked down into the ashes, and they looked back, She saw eyes, faces, whispers curling through the dust. "You are not being blessed," the ashes murmured. "You are being acknowledged." Agnes dipped her fingers into the basin, then pressed them to Mara's forehead. The ash sizzled on her skin. It burned, not with pain, but with memory. Flashes behind her eyes. A woman on fire, reciting a psalm through her own screams. A child pulled from a river, holding a page that refused to burn. A choir of veiled women chanting a name no one had spoken aloud in 500 years. Then silence. Then Agnes whispered, "Repeat after me." Mara opened her mouth, and the words came, not from her lungs, but from deeper, from the spiral of light that had taken root inside her. "In the ashes of the sacred, I bury the lie of salvation. In the name of a Samuel, I reclaim what cannot be forgiven." The room shook, not from power, from memory. The candles snuffed out. The altar split, revealing a circle of bones beneath, like vertebrae of an angel long decayed. And on the wall behind them, written in fresh ash, were the final lines of the rite. "Let her no longer be vessel. Let her no longer be prayer. Let her become word made ruin." Mara's skin cracked, not physically, spiritually, as if every verse they tried to erase from her soul came back in fire, smoke, and sorrow. Her mouth opened, and from within came a scream wrapped in prophecy. "The ashes remember what heaven burned, and so do I." When she woke the next morning, her pillow was black. Her eyes were lined with soot, and over her heart, a mark had appeared overnight, a feather made of flame. Beneath it, one word, spoken. Episode 11, the confession without sin. The door creaked like it hadn't been opened in 100 years. Mara stepped inside the confessional. Dust shimmered in the air like ancient breath. The wood was warm despite the cold. She closed the door behind her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't trembling. She was invited. The darkness greeted her like an old friend. But the silence inside wasn't empty. It was listening. She sat. No voice came through the screen. No priest. No prayer. Only a whisper of breath. Waiting. She cleared her throat. "I don't know what I'm doing here." The wood creaked in response. "I don't know if I've sinned," she continued, "or if everything I've done was part of what was written." The whisper behind the screen grew louder. Not words. A presence pressing through air. She leaned forward, heart thudding. "Are you God?" she asked. The breath laughed. Soft, sad, unholy. And then a voice. Not male, not female, not even human. It spoke slowly, like drawing syllables from the grave. "No, child. God has no need for confession. Only you do." Mara's fingers dug into the seat beneath her. "But I don't feel guilty," she whispered. "Not for carrying this. Not for speaking what they burned. Not for bleeding where they told me to kneel." Silence. Then, "Good." A pause. Then the voice continued, lower now, intimate, heavy. "You were not chosen for redemption. You were chosen for memory." The screen between them began to shift. The grain of the wood moved like ripples across water, and the carved cross at its center faded into something else. An eye, watching, blinking. And inside the pupil, Mara saw herself, not now but across lifetimes, as a veiled woman chanting in a language lost to history, as a child buried beneath stone for hiding forbidden scripture, as a nun giving birth to light while flames consumed her convent. Each version of her bore the same mark, the flame-shaped feather, the word spoken. "I've lived this before," she whispered. The voice answered, "You never stopped." Then came the true confession, not from her, from the other side. Not a sin, a memory. "I was the one who opened the first girl." She bled the song they feared. "I listened, and they locked me behind scripture." Mara's eyes filled with tears. Not hers. Memories weeping through her. She understood now. The confessional was never meant for repentance. It was a vault, a mouth that could not speak, unless she sat there to listen. The voice exhaled one final time and said, "You do not need to be cleansed. You need to remember what clean meant before they told you what sin was." The wood cracked. The walls groaned. and carved into the seat beneath her, glowing softly in red. The altar is not a table. It is a door, and you have the key. When she stepped out, the chapel was silent, the pews empty, the air still, but her breath formed a word on the glass of the holy water basin. Next, Episode 12, The Altar That Ate the Sun. It happened at noon, the brightest part of the day, the hour the sun stood highest, the time when even shadows should retreat. But inside St. Oriel's chapel, the light died, not dimmed, not faded, died. Mara stood in the center aisle, breath caught, arms chilled. The stained glass windows, once ruined, now strangely whole, refused the sun. Light struck them from outside, but nothing came through. It was as if the sun had looked at the chapel and turned its face away. She lit a candle. The flame rose, flickered once, then bent toward the altar, as if pulled. The ground beneath her feet trembled, softly, rhythmically, like breathing from below. She stepped forward, and the altar, her altar, cracked. Not a surface fracture, a split down the center, widening, stretching, opening. Stone groaned like it was remembering pain. Dust poured into the cracks. Then, slowly, a second altar rose. From the dark, from below. It wasn't marble. It wasn't carved by hands. It was bone, compact, stacked, ornate, vertebrae layered into steps, skulls as cornerstones, a spine as the central beam, and at the center, gleaming, teeth, dozens, hundreds, arranged like a mouth, yawning open at the top, as if waiting to devour. Mara couldn't move. She wasn't afraid. She was recognized. The bone altar knew her. It tilted slightly welcoming, like a throne, like a maw. The voice came not from around her, but from inside her spine. The true altar was never built above. It was grown, fed, buried beneath your prayers. She stepped forward, trance-like. Her hand hovered above the bone. It was warm. It pulsed, and as her palm met the surface, a scream erupted from the bones. Not hers. 100 voices, 1,000 mouths, each cry layered over the other, like a cursed litany. We were the offerings. Now we become the hunger. The candles shattered. The chapel walls wept again, this time not oil, but light, bleeding from the bricks, as though the building itself had swallowed too much divinity and was leaking what it couldn't hold. And on the far wall, shadows danced into shape. Figures, women, kneeling, broken, mouths open in silent chants. And behind them, a shape, wings but wrong, a crown but burning, eyes where none should be, the forgotten angel, watching through the altar's hunger. Mara fell to her knees before the bone, her stomach twisted, and in the pit of her soul, the child inside whispered, "Not all altars are for worship. Some are for remembering what was eaten and what will be again." She looked up. The bone altar stared back, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw herself reflected in the teeth. But she was older. She was glowing. She was smiling, and her mouth was full of blood. The bone altar shifted. It began to lower again, sinking back into the earth, but not before gifting one last message. Carved into the stone floor, still smoking. Light never entered, because you were meant to carry it out. And when Mara turned to leave, the sun returned, but it didn't shine on her. It shined from her. Episode 13, The Child Who Didn't Cry. Mara gave birth at midnight, not in a hospital, not on a bed, but on the altar made of bone. It welcomed her. The teeth parted. The stone softened. The chapel held its breath. She screamed only once, not from pain, but from revelation. Because the moment he entered the world, she understood. He had never not been here. The child did not cry. He opened his eyes, and every candle in the chapel ignited at once, roaring with white flame. He did not move, but the air around him rippled, as though reality itself had to make room for him. His skin shimmered, translucent, like glass filled with light. No heartbeat, no breath, but behind his eyes, stars dying and being born all at once. The pews groaned, the shadows gathered, and then the crucifix fell, straight off the wall. It didn't break. It turned, upside down. The Virgin statue cracked down the middle, and in the silence, every relic, every cross, every sacred image tilted, then bowed, not in worship, in surrender. Mara cradled him. He was warm, not human warm, but like a memory of fire, held just beneath the skin. And as she whispered his name, though no name had been given, the altar pulsed beneath her, and from the ground rose a voice, a Samuel's voice, no longer whispering, no longer forgotten. The silence is over. The breath is returned, and he who was buried in the mother now walks in the daughter. The chapel doors burst open. The Vatican envoy arrived. 5 men, all in black, each carrying weapons wrapped in scripture. They stepped forward, silent, shaking. "What is that?" one gasped. Mara stood, eyes glowing, blood at her feet, and her child in her arms, silent, watching, choosing. "You're too late," she said. The child blinked, and the man who asked the question. Collapse? No wounds, just undone, like a word erased from language. The rest fled. Not one looked back. The chapel sealed itself, and outside dawn broke, but the sky did not turn blue. It turned white, like an eye, like a beginning that had forgotten how to end. That night, Mara sat alone with him. He still hadn't cried. He didn't need to, because everything around him wept in his place. She looked into his face, and for the first time in her life, she remembered everything before sin, before time, before the veil. He wasn't salvation. He was a memory of what salvation replaced. And in his silence, she finally understood. He wasn't born to save the world. He was born to remember what it had done. Somewhere, far away, a church bell rang, then cracked, then stopped forever. The final line of the gospel appeared across the chapel ceiling, glowing softly as the last candle died. He did not cry, because the world was already mourning what it had buried. In her,